Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening. My name is Rebecca and I'm a library assistant here at the Spark Digital Media Lab at Burbank Public Library. Welcome to tonight's program, Podcasting 101, featuring award-winning podcaster Kitty Felde. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so we can all enjoy this online program. And I do apologize for the strange symbols appearing on your screens. We're having some technical difficulties with the slideshow, but it shouldn't affect Kitty's presentation. As audience members in the webinar today, you will not be able to speak, but you'll be able to see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the program, you are welcome to type questions in the Q&A box, which we will address towards the end of the program. When you leave the program tonight, you will be redirected to a survey, and we would greatly appreciate it if you could fill that out and help us improve our programs in the future. We'd like to thank the Friends of the Burbank Public Library for their sponsorship of this program. Again, tonight's program is Podcasting 101, and I'll turn it over to our guest, Kitty Felde.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I appreciate that. And it's so nice to be asked to talk anywhere these days because we're all so tired of being in our living rooms and bedrooms, which is where I am tonight. But it's good to have all of you people joining us this evening. Thank you. I thought I should tell you a little bit about myself before I got into podcasting. What I really wanted to be was Vin Scully. I actually got into radio because I joined a contest. The station that had the Dodgers had a sports talk show, and they realized that no women at all were listening to this program. So they thought, oh, we'll put a female voice on the air, and then women will flock to the show and we'll get great ratings. Well, you can imagine how that turned out. But I was among the 2,000 or so people who had tried out for this sports talk show, and I didn't win, but I got to be one of the 10 finalists. And that accidentally left me falling into public radio, where I first got to interview a lot of sports people. I also realized that play-by-play was probably not my gift because I have really poor vision and depth perception was an issue. And so every fly ball looked like a home run to me. But in radio, I had a chance to cover a lot of interesting things. The O.J. Simpson trial, I covered war crimes trials in Africa, as well as in Europe. And I covered Congress for many, many years. That was my most recent radio gig. But I also hosted a talk show for nearly a decade on KPCC here in Los Angeles. So this time now, once I left radio, I fell into podcasting, and I currently produce 2 podcasts. The first one is called The Book Club for Kids. And on it, I interview a trio of kids about middle grade novels. They get to talk to the author and ask questions, and then we get a celebrity to read a passage from the book. And it can be, an actor like Joshua Molina or Mimi Kennedy. We've had the former Secretary of Education. We've had an LA Laker, an LA Dodger, you name it. We've had them on the show to be our celebrity reader to read from that. I also produce another podcast. It's an audio drama, episodic. It's called the Fina Mendoza Mysteries, and it's about the 10-year-old daughter of a congressman who solves mysteries on Capitol Hill. And it's actually based on my book, Welcome to Washington, Fina Mendoza, and book 2 comes out this summer. So there'll be a second season coming up on that. All right, well, let's talk a bit about podcasting. And here's the good and bad news. First of all, there are nearly 1.8 million podcasts out there as of April of this year. That's according to Edison Research. So you've got to ask yourself the big questions. Why do I want to start a podcast? And you really have to ask those questions because it's a major time suck. I have to tell you that. It can take up the rest of your life working on a podcast. So you really, really, really have to want to do it. Your time is going to be spent preparing for the podcast. It's going to be spent editing the podcast, and it's going to be spent promoting the podcast. So do some research. What is your great idea that you have? What else is out there? Does somebody else have a podcast about, butterfly migration or whatever topic it is that you're interested in? Listen to it, find out what they're doing, and can you do it better? I'm sure you can, but it's really helpful to know what else is out there before you actually put the time and energy into this. you have to ask yourself some more questions. How often do I want to produce a podcast episode? Is it going to be once a week? Is it going to be once a month? Is it going to be every day? Are you going to do an entire season's worth? And how long is that season going to be? For us on the Fina Mendoza Mysteries, our season was 8 episodes, plus bonus episodes. And that's the other thing. Do you want to throw bonus episodes in? Do you have any idea what they might be? So those are the first questions to figure out. The other thing is, how long do you want your podcast to be? Think about your audience. How long do they want to listen? Um, a lot of podcasts are more than an hour. I think that's way too long personally. The sweet spot is about 20 to 30 minutes. That's about the sweet spot these days with podcasts. But you certainly can do anything you want because, nobody's on the phone saying, "Hey, we have to run news at the top of the hour. We have to run commercials right now." So it's up to you to decide. But I would decide it by deciding how long does my audience want to listen to me and what I'm putting on the air. The next question is, what kind of podcast do you want to do? Is it just going to be you and a microphone talking? It works for a lot of people, depending on if you have a lot of things to say. Is it going to be you and a partner having a conversation? So that means you need 2 microphones. Is it going to be a group discussion, a panel that's going to show up, or a rotating panel, a lot of people having a conversation? Is it going to be I'm going to call it a public radio style or a This American Lifestyle of podcast, a serial type of podcast, which is narration with interviews that you mix in, sound bites, as we used to call them in radio, with music mix in the background? That's a very popular form of podcasting also. Will it be an audio drama? Will it be an audio drama you're going to tape in a studio, or are you going to do like what we did with Fina Mendoza? We actually took it out under the streets and tried to tape in natural environments. I think it was all that public broadcasting training where you were looking for ambient sound. And I was always looking for ambient sound that could take the listener into the drama. That was the decision we decided to make with that one. Or is there something else you want to do? Is this a new kind of audio experiment you want to try? I mean, it's a great place to do that. For Angelinos, you may remember Joe Frank. He was doing all kinds of odd and weird and interesting audio things. And I don't know that anybody has really done that kind of thing as a podcast. So if you have some creative audio ideas, this is a great place to do that. But be as specific as you possibly can in trying to figure out what it is you want to do, why you want to do it, and how you're going to do it. That's the first thing. But now let's talk about spending some money. There's a bit of an expense for podcasting, not a lot. You can do this for under $1,000. You can do it for well under $1,000. But if I were going to go out and start from scratch today, where I would spend the most money would be on a microphone. You really need a good microphone. It makes all the difference in the world. I cannot listen to a podcast that uses Zoom sound. It just offends my ears and it bothers me, and I won't listen. Now, I'm maybe an exception, but I don't think so. So get yourself a decent microphone. There's a number you can get that will work. But the first thing you have to figure out is, where are you going to plug that microphone in? Are you going to record directly into your computer? Are you going to be using a recording device, what we used to call a tape recorder? These days, they're digital recorders. They're portable. You can carry them around with you. Are you going to be going through a mixing board? Because the reason to remember this is, well, I'm not going to, well, I don't know, you can see me there. You need to figure out what it's going to plug into. So you either need a microphone that's going to be, this version of the end, XLR, or USB. And the reason is because, how is that microphone powered? You don't need to know any of this, but that's why they are different. It depends on what's powering the microphone. So if you're going to go right into your computer, you're going to want a USB port. If you're going to go into more sophisticated recording equipment, you're probably going to want an XLR out. And that changes the kind of microphone. So that's the first thing to figure out, is how you're going to record it. And I would suggest, if you're looking for a microphone, there's a lot out there. A lot of people have Yetis. Not my favorite kind of microphone. Nothing wrong with it. It's just not quite the quality. And it just depends on how much money you have to spend. If you have more than $100 to spend, look at the Rode, R-O-D-E, or look at the Shure, S-C-H-U-R-E. I love the Electro Voice. EV is the initials for that. And this one is my newest one is an Audio Technica because it has a USB out. So all of those are very, very good brands of microphones. Now, I will tell you one more thing, which is people get really funny about microphones, about how they sound on them. There was a colleague at my old radio station who would only use one microphone because he loved the way it made him sound, and he never would use any other one. So when you start getting more and more into this, you may find yourself that, oh, I'll never use a Rode. It just makes me sound terrible. You don't have to worry about that to get started. But just to know there are a lot of audiophiles out there who are just absolute audio snobs. Excuse me. The other thing you're going to want, and I don't have one on here, you're going to want a screen, or, it looks like a giant foam condom that you put on your microphone. And that is because all of us who articulate aspirate our P. I'm going to turn my head and do this. P's and T's. I can aspirate a D. And it makes electronic popping noises on your recording. And it's, again, an annoyance. And what you don't want is anything that's going to make your audience want to turn the sound off and switch to a different podcast. So the more you can give them good quality sound that isn't going to annoy them, the better off you're going to be. And it doesn't cost much. You can also, you're going to want something to put the microphone on so that you're not holding it and making noises. If you're out in the field, particularly now, you're going to want a long holder because of COVID restrictions. So, but those are all extras. They don't cost very much. Where your main money is going is to the quality of the microphone. So I mentioned about making decisions about that microphone based on how you're going to record it. So you have to make that decision. You can record directly into your computer. You can use a mixing board. That's what you're going to need if you're having more than one voice coming in. You can take your microphone out into the field, as I mentioned, and use a digital recorder. That's how I recorded all of the Fina Mendoza. That's actually how I use for both of the podcasts that I do. Part of that is because I'm out in the field. I'm not sitting in front of my computer talking. And part of that, quite frankly, is because, for 30 years, that's what I was doing. And it just seems like second nature to have a microphone in my hand and a very lightweight recorder on my hip with a shoulder strap. So that's how I go into classrooms and talk to kids for the Book Club for Kids podcast. But when it came to the Fina Mendoza Mysteries, we wanted to record out in places that sounded like the places in the book. So the book takes place in the U.S. Capitol. I went out looking for places. I couldn't record in the Capitol, but I could find places here in Los Angeles that had that sound, that hard, echoey surface. It was my HOA's clubhouse that we borrowed to record the scenes that were inside the US Capitol, to indicate things like it's fall and we're walking. Well, there's a lot of leaves on the ground. So we would walk through leaves to give that sound of fall to the listener. So you can do a lot of things when you're not tied to being in a studio. If you're in a studio, or if you're sitting in front of your computer at home, you can always add sound effects later, but that just wasn't what I wanted to do. It's your choice how you want to do this. How you want it to sound is your choice. Because we're in the middle of a pandemic, we're also being faced with a real challenge, and that is, how do you do this remotely? How do you record people who are not with you in the room and you want to include those other voices? There's a lot of ways to do this. There's a lot of software and apps that you can use to record phone calls. Again, never my favorite, but you use what you can. Oftentimes, what I will do is just use the voice memo app on somebody's phone. When we have celebrity readers reading a page from a book for Book Club for Kids, I send them a copy of the page I'd like them to read, and they record themselves on their smartphone. And the quality is pretty darn good. It's not bad at all. And then they just email the file to you. Now, the challenge with that is email doesn't work very well with files that are longer than 3 to 4 minutes long. It takes forever, if ever, for them to go. You can always put them in Dropbox or upload them to your G Drive and then just share them that way. But just so you know ahead of time that you can't record a 40-minute conversation on your phone and expect it to show up in somebody's email box in an hour. It just doesn't work that way. There's Zencaster is another software program out there that you can use. I just discovered a new one called TalkSync, SYNC. It's pretty cheap. It's about $10 a month, I think, and there's a free trial period. And that one's nice because in the same way, well, what it does is you can have, here's how that works for TalkSync. You download it as an app on your phone, on your smartphone, and you have your guests or your other participants also download it on their phone. You get a code for the particular recording session. And at the same time, you're going to have a conversation with that person on Zoom. So you're having the conversation, seeing each other, but the recording itself, they have hit record on their phone. They put the phone down. They have the headphones in so that you're not getting feedback going in from the Zoom. And the file at the end will show up, if I'm the producer, will show up at my laptop as separate files from all of the guests. And unless those people are kicking their chairs and squeaking and the mother is yelling in the background, this often happens during book club and you have to clean it up. But if your guests are conscious and aware of their surroundings and are being quiet, you're going to get 4 or however many guests you have clean files showing up on your computer, and you just match them up. You can have all of your guests, before you start talking, clap so you can match up the sound lines so everything is in sync. And it's a wonderful, to me, that's the best so far that I've discovered in the middle of the pandemic for recording remotely. Okay, the next thing is you have to decide where you're going to record. I talked about the ambiance that I decided I wanted for the Fina Mendoza Mysteries. For the classrooms that I go in and do book club, when I do it in person, I kind of like the sound of a classroom, the bell going off, the kids in the hallway, the scuffling of shoes, those kinds of things, because it really puts us a place where this podcast takes place. Again, that's my public radio background. But generally, what you want is the quietest space you can possibly imagine. You want to have obviously no sirens. This was an old radio thing that somebody told me, because if somebody's listening to your podcast in their car and they hear that siren in your recording, they're going to pull over because they think it's a cop behind them pulling them over. So no sirens. And if you're recording at home, you want to be in a very soundproof area. NPR has a very good guide to making it soft. That's what you're going to want. Carpet on the floor. They sell something called an array where you can have it surround your microphone so that you're padding the sound. You can create a sound booth with those styrofoam. They look like egg cartons up on the walls. That's what you see in professional recording studios. Most people I know record in their closets because there's clothes in there and they muffle the sound. That's where I do my tracks for book club for kids, is in my closet. But you want it to be as the best quality sound you can deliver. Again, you're doing this because that's what your listeners are relying on. They can't see anything else. They're relying on their ears, and you really want to give them the best quality experience you possibly can. All right, now we come to the least favorite part of podcasting, and that is editing. Editing will take more time than anything else that you will do with your podcast. And you just, it's almost impossible to just record something and have it go out. I mean, you could do that. And if you're absolutely perfect, you don't need to edit. But we're human beings and things happen, and we forget our words, and we drop the paper, and we bump the microphone, and we say too many times. We pop our P's, so we want to take that out. So and maybe there's elements you want to add to it, sound effects or a phone call you want to include. Those things need to be edited in. And lucky you, the Burbank Library is going to be starting a class with my favorite editing software called Audacity. Now, there's other things you can edit on. There's tons. You can do it in GarageBand if you have a Mac. You can do it in Adobe Audition. You can do it in David. That's what NPR used to use. Pro Tools is what a lot of musicians use. I've used all of these, but Audacity for me is the absolute best. It's not too hard to learn. You kind of have fun with it, et cetera, et cetera. The other option, of course, is you can hire somebody. It's, 35 to 50 bucks an hour, but you can hire somebody to do your editing for you. But again, that is one of the big elements of having a podcast. The next question is, where are you going to put your podcast? Where's it going to be? What's going to be the home for your podcast? And you can put it on your website. Certainly. It's a good place to host it, or at least have a place where you can find it. But how are you going to get it out to Spotify? How are you going to get it out to Apple? How are you going to get it out to SoundCloud? All these other places that people are listening to podcasts. Well, you need to have a host. And there's a number of them out there. Anchor, Podbean, Blueberry, Beansprout. Personally, I use Libsyn. It's easy and reliable, and it sends my stuff out everywhere, including places like LinkedIn, for heaven's sakes. You pay a certain amount a month, you get a certain amount of storage, and that's how that works. Now let's talk about how your podcast will look. And I know that sounds strange, but when you look on Spotify, when you look on Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts, you're looking for a new podcast, you're not listening really. Your first experience with discovering a podcast is the little square box, that little thumbnail, that image. And you have to think, what image can I come up with that's literally the size of my thumbnail that can tell the story about what your podcast is all about? It has to be clean. It has to be legible. It has to be interesting. If you have a graphic artist friend, that's always a good way to go. Apple's specifications are that it has to be between 1400 by 1400 up to 3000 by 3000. It's really, really, really important. It's worth spending some money on. You can go on Freelancer or Fiverr, look at people's work, but think in your own mind about what tells the story of your podcast. What image can you put that somebody will see that and go, oh yeah, it's a podcast about migrating butterflies. That's what I want. You probably have a butterfly on there. The other thing is music. Most podcasts have music, at least intros and outros, and some of them have it throughout. Number one rule, do not steal music. Do not steal music. There is a lot of free music out there that you can use. You can also, you live in Los Angeles, for heaven's sakes. The town is full of musicians, and I've hired a number of composers to write music for the podcasts that I've done. That way you have music that is peculiar to your own podcast. I have to say, it's so weird to me when I can't remember where this happened, but I was listening to somebody's podcast and I was so distracted because I recognized that music, but not from their podcast, from somebody else's. And it was very kind of, your brain was going back and forth. So, my recommendation is find a musician friend and use their music. That to me is the best way to go. Okay, now let's get prepared. How do you prepare for a podcast? How do you get ready to go? I highly recommend writing a script, if not, word for word, but bullet points, a roadmap, so to speak, of where you want to go. It may not always follow that track, but you really should have that. And I always found this extremely helpful when I was doing the talk show. I would have ideas about where I wanted to go. Well, the conversation with the guest often would take a left turn and I would follow that left turn. But then I would forget where I was. And it certainly was helpful to have a piece of paper in front of me so I could come back and get back on the train because, heck, I had another 20 minutes to fill. So it will also help you cut down on the number of uhs that you use and the other placeholders that we all use when we can't think of our next word. I used to confess on the air that my brain went to China when I completely lost my train of thought, but it really helps to have something down in front of you. Practice with your equipment. Get out the microphone, put on your headphones, practice, practice, practice. This will make you feel more confident. It will help you not waste the time of your guests. And again, it makes you into a professional podcaster. Wear your headphones. Now, I had mine on, but mine weren't working particularly well tonight, so I took them out. But most people hate them because they hate the sound of their own voice. You got to get used to it. I'm sorry. You were born with this voice. You got to use this voice. That's the way it works. And the easier it is, the more often you do it. So just wear the headphones. The other thing is watch your clock. because you've already decided ahead of time, I'm going to do a podcast that's 20 minutes long. So you kind of want to go 20 minutes because otherwise you're going to be editing out the other 35 minutes that you recorded. You're wasting your time. So be more efficient. If it's a 5-minute podcast, go 5 minutes. You don't have to go right on the dot, but try to stay to a clock. It really will help you in the end. But how do people find you? How do people find your podcast? Discovery is the biggest challenge for everybody, whether you're a brand new podcast, whether you've been around for years. A lot of it, quite frankly, is kismet. Things just happen. Something in the news that ties into your podcast. Apple decides to feature podcasts that have to do with butterflies this month. Who knows why, but that's just the way it happened. And suddenly all your numbers go like crazy. But let's start with the basics. First of all, it's like selling anything. How do I sell my book? First of all, you contact everybody you know, your friends and your family. You let them know what you're doing. You invite them to follow your podcast, to subscribe. You invite them to write a review. That always helps as well. You use your social media channels that you have, as many as you possibly can. If you're a video person, maybe you're going to be using Instagram Live to show you recording the podcast. If you're really good at photography, maybe just take over Instagram. So it just depends on, you can put things on Pinterest. Use the ones that you feel comfortable with. Expand your reach a little bit. Again, these are just ways to kind of make the world aware that you exist. One other easy way to do this is to find other podcasts that you can be a guest on. There's certainly a lot of podcasts that are similar to yours. I do kid podcasts. Oftentimes I will have, and one of them will have written a book, and it happens to be a book that the kids I'm interviewing want to talk about. So that podcaster is also talking about their podcast on my podcast. Podcast listeners are always looking for great new podcasts. So that's always a great way to do it. The other thing is press. I mean, write a basic press release and send it out. Particularly, I mean, you can do it on patch, but if you have a local newspaper left in your area, send it out there. We've gotten coverage on Book Club for Kids on a number of newspapers around the country because I sent a press release. It's not that hard. The other thing is you can actually ask Apple and Spotify to feature your podcast. They've got a form. You got to search around a little bit for it, but fill it out, come up with a really good pitch. Why is your podcast worth featuring? And maybe they will. Those are my suggestions for discovery. And it's just going to take a long time. Do not be discouraged. I think the first time we dropped Book Club for Kids, I think we had 68 downloads. Well, now we have 30,000 a month. So it just takes a long time to build up an audience. Book Club has been around since July of 2015. So we're coming up on our 6-year anniversary for that. Fina Mendoza is just a couple of years old. So it takes a while to build that audience. Be patient. All right, but now we're coming up to the big question, which I'm sure everybody is wanting to ask, and that is, how do I make money on my podcast? Well, there's basically 4 ways that you can make money. You can do advertising, you can do subscriptions, you can do Patreon, and you can do grants. So let me go down the numbers. Advertising is the one we probably know the most about because we hear those ads in podcasts. The challenge is that most advertisers are not really interested in you unless you have big numbers. And I mean big numbers. Even at my 30,000 downloads a month, that's not big enough really to attract an advertiser. I don't go the advertising route for another reason. But at any rate, that is, it just wouldn't be that interesting to people. The other thing is when you get an advertiser, they pay you in what they call CPM, and that's cost per 1,000 listeners. So let's say we have 1,000 listeners, 1,000 subscribers. You're only going to get $18 for a 30-second ad. On these are the averages in the industry right now. Maybe if it's a 60-second ad, you're going to get $25 for those 1,000 listeners. And then where you put that advertising, the prices are different. The one at the beginning of the show, usually you get the most money for. The middle is less. The end is even less because a lot of people tune out by then. You have to decide if this is going to be a pre-made drop-in ad, or is this going to be one that the host reads? Is that going to be a problem, a conflict of interest? When I was a journalist, they would keep the advertising side away from us completely. Of course, we were always on the air begging for money during pledge drives, but that was a little bit different. We were selling ourselves, I guess is the way you could put that. But that's a decision you might have to make. If it's something you don't want to do as a host, you can always find a friend with a great voice to just do the read for you. And if you want to go the ad route, there's actually software out there that can drop the ads in for you. You don't have to worry about that. They'll take care of all of that. So that's the ad route. Apple just announced its subscription route, and Spotify is going the same way. It's coming out, I don't know if it's this month or next. Apple's charging podcasters $20 a year, and then they take 30% of the money that you make by signing up subscribers. Now, it's your decision, but you have to have enough people to actually make it worth your while to even make that $20 a year through Apple. Patreon is the granddaddy of subscriptions. It's much more like public radio in that you are basically begging for money, but you're gathering a community and you're offering them something extra, perhaps an extra episode, a meetup, something, a T-shirt, something for those Patreon contributors. The other way to do it is a grant. Now, if you have a public mission, and quite frankly, that's the way I have gone with my two podcasts. Book Club for Kids is a literacy podcast. It's designed to try to keep kids reading past middle school when we lose them. Kids in middle school read what are those the numbers? 70% of kids in middle school read 10 or more books a year, but by the time they get to high school, it just falls off a cliff. So our mission is to keep those middle grade readers reading. That's what we do. And we've applied for and gotten a number of grants from a number of organizations. And that's how I pay my editors and how we pay for travel and everything else. Fina Mendoza, it's a civics mission. The purpose of Fina Mendoza is to try to teach elementary kids the basics of civics. How does government work? And to try to get them excited about being a citizen. So again, we're going after those kinds of grants for that program. If you have a particular mission that would fit into grant guidelines, there's lots of organizations here in Southern California that can help you with grant writing. You don't have to hire somebody, and that's a way to go as well. But this is your decision. It really kind of fits in with what kind of podcast you're going to be producing. Now, I mentioned that Burbank Library is going to be teaching you how to edit coming up. But there's lots of other places you can get resources and places to learn more about how to podcast, because I only get an hour. And so there's a lot of podcasts out there, for example, the Audacity to Podcast, the School of Podcasting, Podcastification, Podcasting Simplified. There's more out there. There's lots and lots and lots of free podcasts that will walk you through the process and have lots of great suggestions. There's organizations out there, and I highly recommend doing some community building with these organizations. And I'm just going to mention a few. NPR has a lot of free resources on the recording side, on the distribution side, all kinds of things. There's a lot of free stuff you can find through them. AIR is the Association of Independents in Radio. They're terrific. They put on a conference. There's a conference every year, used to be every year in Chicago. Now I think it's virtual, the Third Coast. It used to be for independent radio producers. Now it's almost entirely about podcasting. It's a great place to hang out if you're a public radio type. Last year year before last, I guess, there's one called Work It, WERK It. And it's for women podcasters. And it's kind of a nice group to hang out with. And I have to tell you, it's really interesting because when I first started out doing podcasts, it was almost all guys. And they were almost all doing business podcasts. So when I showed up doing a kids podcast, they were like, what? So Work It was kind of a nice place for women podcasters to find community. And again, you go to these conventions. Let me mention one more. The Big Daddy podcast movement is the big one. Hundreds and hundreds of podcasters show up. And a lot of these are sessions on how to make money, how to improve your quality of your audio. They have a lot of, everybody who makes a microphone is there in the exhibitors hall. You can try out microphones. It's a nice place to do big networking. It's not cheap. Another organization, if you're interested in kidcasts, is an organization called Kids Listen. It's a grassroots organization for people who put out podcasts for little ears. It's cheap to join, and they have some webinars as well as a lot of advocacy and other things going on. 3 books I would recommend as well. Dave Jackson, again, the granddaddy of podcasting, has a book called Profit from Your Podcast. Eric Newsom, who is the NPR guy who sort of steered the mothership into the podcasting world, has a book out called Make Noise. And Valerie Geller, who has been around since I started in radio, she would go around to radio stations and help people be better at what they do. And her book is called Beyond Powerful Radio. She's a terrific speaker if you want to bring somebody in to talk to you. And that's what I've got. So I'm going to shut up and open the door to you and let you ask some questions of me. I may not know all the answers, but I think I can at least steer you in the right direction. So Rebecca, who have we got? What have we got?
Yeah, so we already have a couple of questions coming up. Folks, the Q&A button should be at the bottom of your screen if you want to ask anything. So one person wants to know if you could list off the actual equipment that you're using today, your microphone, your recording setup. They say software. I know you mentioned you use Audacity for your recording. And then I was also interested to know what kind of support you get as far as folks helping you out.
So I have to do a caveat for all of this because, as I said, I'm a public radio person. And so when I started doing podcasting, I just basically used the equipment that I was comfortable with, which meant I was using my EV 630, I believe, an Electro Voice microphone. I should have brought all this stuff upstairs. It's about this big. It's about 6 inches long. I get it because it's light. I could carry it around with me everywhere. But I found as I was interviewing kids, they were not as loud as adults oftentimes, and I needed something more. So then I started using a shotgun mic. A shotgun mic is about 12 to 14 inches long, and it looks exactly like what you're calling it. So that's what I will use. I have my little XLR cord, like this. One end plugs into the microphone and one plugs into my machine. I use a Marantz. And unfortunately, the machine that I use, they don't make it anymore, but I keep buying the used ones on eBay. They're really small. When I first got into radio, my cat next door is out he hears my voice. He's my biggest fan. There he is, wanting me to come out and play peekaboo later. I used to have a very heavy recorder, really heavy, and I strained my back, believe it or not, carrying it around with me in the field. So I switched to as light an equipment as I possibly could. And so I use this it's only about 6 inches and it's very light. It has a strap. You can put it on your shoulder or hold it in your hand. Great machine. What else do I use? I have I have a pair of really good Shure earbuds that I use that I just now threw on the floor. They're around here someplace. I just have a lightweight laptop, very lightweight. It's an HP Pavilion. Again, I got it because I was carrying it to Capitol Hill every day. And that was my production studio, was at a table in the press area of the US Capitals. And I had to carry the damn thing to Capitol Hill. So light was really important to me. I use Audacity. I use Libsyn to host my podcast. I use Squarespace for my website because I can figure out how to set it up and change it. It's really easy to do. And that's about it. I think that's it. There was another question though you asked, Rebecca, about something else I use. What would?
Yeah, I was interested to know how many people kind of help you out, how many people are in your operation, and do you think it would be possible for someone to be kind of a one-person band on this?
I was a one-person band. Actually, I have been until this past couple of years, been a one-person band. I produced book club all by myself. When we finally got some grant money, I hired a woman who was one of my producers at KPCC, Ilse Setziel. She unfortunately is moving on. But we've worked together for a number of years, and she would do the first edit of the podcast, take the raw sound, because we had a number of elements with book club. We had the kids talking, we had the author being interviewed, we had the kid questions, and we had the author answering those. Those had to be matched together. We ask all our guests, what's your favorite book? So that goes on at the end. We had a celebrity reader. We had them also giving us their favorite books. There were a lot of elements that had to be mixed together. So she would do the first mix, and then I would do the final mix. I would maintain the website. I send out a newsletter every 2 weeks for book club with a reading tip for reluctant readers. So that's our way of, keeping in touch with our listeners and providing, we hope, something of value to them, as well as being able to tell them about what's coming up, let them know when we show up in, like we showed up in the New York Times, that was exciting. We put that in there, that kind of stuff. So I am pretty much a one-person band. With Fina, I wrote the script. I adapted it from my book. I recorded it. I did all of the editing for that. And I hired the actors. I found the actors to do the show. So you can do it as one person band. It's not impossible. Just know it going in ahead of time, it will suck your life away.
Fair enough. So somebody else, going back to when you were cautioning against using Zoom to record audio, what if you're interviewing people in a different location? We can't control what microphone they use. Also, is it okay to record via Zoom using a good microphone, would you think?
It's just not going to make any difference. I'm sorry. It's just, if you have to, you do what you have to do. But what I would do, you're not doing it live. You're going to have to edit this later. I would have them, quite frankly, it would better quality sound is have them record themselves on their phone at the same time you're talking to them. Just make sure it doesn't bleed. The Zoom doesn't bleed into their phone. But you will get better quality sound from a voice memo file and even better quality sound from TalkSync. And TalkSync is so damn cheap. It's really worth the investment. And you don't need a microphone for that. Now, I do know some people who actually, there are cheap microphones you can buy, and they have been shipping them out to their guests and stuff like that. But there's also that learning curve of learning how to use stuff. And it's just, it's really a pain. It really is a pain. So my motto is simple, but boy, the best quality you can possibly get. And you won't be sorry. You really won't.
All right, awesome. So someone else wants to know, how many episodes do you recommend that they start off with?
Well, it depends. I think you need to decide how often you want to produce and how much time you have to produce. So when I started book club, I decided I wanted to do one every other week. And I think I released a tease. That's always a good thing to do. You create a very short 3-minute, 2-minute, 1-minute preview of what your show's going to be like, so that the listener has a real idea of, well, I'm not interested in trains. I'm not going to, whatever it is. I'm just, I can hardly wait for this next episode to drop. You don't have to have a whole bunch in the bank, but you have to think ahead about how much time do I have to regularly produce? Because this is the key thing. Your numbers will drop if you're irregular. Your audience wants to know how often you're going to drop stuff. And let's say you want to do a season. Maybe you want to get that whole darn season done and be able to do some promos and everything else and promotion before you drop it. It just depends. What you don't want to do is put 3 up and then quit. And quite frankly, although I can't remember the number on this, somebody said that there are, I think, of 70% of the podcasts that show up from people who use Anchor are one podcasts, because it takes a lot of work and you got to be able to devote your life to it. And if you don't want to, you ain't going to do it anymore. So it depends on how much you want to commit to this and how much you want to commit to this as far as time goes.
That makes a lot of sense. Someone wants to know about search engine optimization and whether you have any tips about reaching a specific audience.
You should know ahead of time what your audience is, rather than going into the technicalities of SEO. I mean, I think it's much more important to think about who is your audience. So for example, for book club, it took me a while to figure this out. And it was a really helpful conversation I had best friend's husband sells and makes ads at a television station in a news station in Albuquerque. And, he said, you have to really visualize who is your audience. And I realized that my audience, quite frankly, isn't the kids, because they're not going to find me. They weren't, especially in 2015, great podcast consumers, but their teachers and their parents and their librarians were. And that was my audience, predominantly female, predominantly teachers and librarians and parents and grandparents. So you try to figure out how to market to them. What are they looking for? In my case, it was reading tips, recommended reading, am reading. I mean, you can pretty much kind of go through Twitter and look for hashtags that work. There's a number of, there's something called, what is it called? Publisher Rocket for $100. And it's designed to help writers identify SEO and keywords in Amazon, but you could use it for a podcast too, if you can't figure this out by yourself. But I really think you can. You just kind of really think, who am I trying to reach? If I'm doing my butterfly podcast, it's going to be, I don't know what they're called. Help me out here, Rebecca. What are scientists who study butterflies called?
I think they're Lepidopterist.
Oh, thank you. Incorrect. Yes. So that would be a great word to include in your SEO, because that's what you're looking for. So you can pretty much vet this out. But I don't think SEO is going to help you get an audience necessarily. You might be better off joining a group of Lepidopterists on Facebook, or seeing if there's a butterfly chat on Twitter, or see if somebody is doing TikTok videos about butterflies. I mean, just think about who your audience is and find them on social.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for just finding community. We had a container gardening webinar last week, and the speaker was talking about joining Facebook groups, especially in your local area, and how useful that could be.
Yeah.
So that definitely makes a lot of sense. Okay, we've got another one about kind of the details of a setup. If my podcast consists of two people hosting, sitting together at the same computer, what is the best way to record two microphones? I've had difficulty doing this, and I've found only GarageBand can accommodate both mics, but it's not the easiest to use. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, you're going to have to buy a mixer. You're going to have to buy, an interface that the two microphones can go into, and then a line goes out of that and goes into your computer. What is the name of mine, and where did I put it? I wish I could remember. I can't find it right now. But what you want is a small mixer. I keep wanting to call it Fortnite, but I know that's the video game. It has a name like that. I can't remember what it's called.
What do you use? I think it's a Focusrite. That's what we have.
Focusrite, that's what it is. Lab. That's what I use as well. I don't use it very often because I don't do that kind of podcast, but that's what you need. It'll cost you a couple $100, $150, something like that. That's what you need.
And that's Focusrite with RITE at the end. If anyone is doing that. Oh, and somebody in the Q&A recommends Mackie for mixers. So that's helpful.
There you go. Mackie's been around for a long time. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. And this is, again, the advantage of going to right now we can't, but if you can go to any kind of podcast gathering, and actually there are a lot of groups, like in LA, there's a podcast meetup group. You can find them through, Facebook and elsewhere. You can just Google it, because people there's some techie guys out there. They love showing off their stuff. They love it. And so they'll be more than happy to let you play with their stuff, and you can kind of get your feeling for it. It's a great place to kind of do pre-shopping.
And I'll go ahead and plug the Spark Lab here. You can come in and use our microphones and our Focusrite if you wanted to get a feel for it as well. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. Okay, we do have one more that's kind of maybe more philosophical, perhaps. Can silence ever be meaningful in a podcast or radio format?
Silence is it's a tricky one, because your first reaction as a listener is, what happened? What's wrong? It's deadly silence. You think the transmitter's gone down in radio. That's the worry. Pausing is great. Pausing it's a very powerful tool, but there's that fine line between pausing and, uh-oh, something's wrong. And it's just, you'll sense it. You'll sense it, I think. A lot of people fill that space with music or sound. So you're not talking, but you have, I mean, and that's that This American Life kind of quality that you have the sound will carry you on. We would use that in the Fina Mendoza Mysteries, just to kind of transition scenes and stuff like that. But I don't think you can get away with a 10-second pause on podcasts or radio because everybody's going to go, what's wrong with my room? Oh, it's a nothing. Things are fine.
Yeah, I definitely 10 seconds. That's a good, maybe a good starter.
Ooh, that's long.
That's
I mean, for me, that's way
already.
too long. Yeah. No, I'm like, after 3 seconds, I'm like, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
That's me because I've had way too much caffeine today.
I had a chicken or an egg question for you, kind of. When you were first getting into podcasting, did you come up with the idea behind the topic for your podcast first, or did you have the idea to have a podcast and then come up with the idea for it?
When I left KPCC, I really had this, what do I want to do now? Do I want to keep doing what I was doing, which I could have covered Capitol Hill. I could have done freelance stuff like that. I could have gotten another job in journalism, and I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So, I started an Etsy shop. I went out back to acting because that was what I did first. I realized I didn't like standing around. So, I thought about in journalism, what was the thing I had the most fun doing? And quite frankly, when I had the talk show once a month, we would throw the adults out of the studio and invite kids in to talk about a book. And those conversations were so rich and so interesting and so fun. That's what I wanted to go back and do. And I had done that on KPCC in the studio. We did it at libraries around LA. We did it on LA 36 cable TV. And then when I covered Capitol Hill, it was just too busy. So I wanted to go back and do that. And about that same time, podcasting was becoming, it was around. And I thought, I can do this myself. I don't need to have a station tell me, oh, yeah, okay, you can do this. I gave myself permission to do that. So the idea was there. I knew how to do it. I kind of knew what I wanted. And then how to do it was a podcast. And with Fina, I didn't think about doing her as a podcast. I had written my first book, Welcome to Washington, Fina Mendoza, all about my experiences in Washington, D.C. And the book was out, and I was working on the second book, but I wasn't ready. But I wanted to still be in that world. And I thought, I've written plays. I could adapt this as an audio play. And so that's what I did. I wrote it as an audio play, not a lot of the book. It changes. Things aren't in there. Other things are. And you have to tell the story in a different way. You have to be able to, I wanted to take our listeners there. The book is first person, but I wanted to tell the story as if we, the audience, were experiencing it along with Fina. So you find ways to do that, like, rather than an internal monologue about Fina being scared in the Capitol crypt and hearing all these weird noises, I had one of the statues come to life. The statue of Caesar Rodney is giving her a hard time about being a scaredy cat. So you find ways to use sound to tell your story. So I found it really a really creative challenge. And unlike when you're writing and you're all by yourself, it was much more like theater where you're in a community, and to be able to work with actors, who can bring your things to life. It was it was just an invigorating experience. So it just depends. I think this podcasting just opens a lot of doors to all of us who have a creative itch and we don't quite know what to do about it.
Definitely. So I think the answer to this one might be in the same kind of vein. Do podcasters bridge to video, i.e. YouTube, or do they do a mix of both? And this is something I've noticed in the podcasts I listen to. They've started kind of releasing videos in the last couple of years.
Well, and that's because I think the next generation is completely video. It just loves it. And a lot of people will record it at the same time and put it up on YouTube. And there's discoverability can help when you have stuff on YouTube. You can also cut it down and be shorter and use it on TikTok. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities there. I'm quite frankly of an age where I don't really like myself looking at myself that much. I like my voice, but I don't want to see myself for an hour and a half on YouTube. It just doesn't, it's not what I want to do. Maybe when I was 20, it would have been really cool thing. But at my age, oh, that's all right.
Fair enough. Okay, I think that we are about out of time for questions. So I want to say thank you, Kitty, for the engaging talk tonight. It was so great. And I know I'm definitely inspired to get a move on that podcast I've been thinking about for ages.
Yay! What's it about? Can we ask? Can we get a sneak
You
preview?
know, that was my question about chicken and egg, because I don't really have a topic yet. So maybe I'll just have to start workshopping that.
Well, I'm always here. I'm always loving to hear ideas bounced off me. And I am coming out to record a book club as soon as you guys have kids back in the library.
That's
We
right. That's
really want to
right.
come out and record with you. And that actually, oops, I'm sorry. That invitation actually is out to anybody who's with us tonight on the seminar. If anybody wants, if they know a group of young people who would like to be on the podcast, please reach out to us at Book Club for Kids, because we would love to put your kids and make them podcast stars.
All right. Thanks so much, Kitty. And thank you to our attendees for all of your questions. Before we finish up tonight, I want to let you know about some things going on at the library. Please check out our Spark Digital Media Lab. If you haven't heard about it before, we opened back in January of 2020. And right now, it's a technology learning space where we have equipment and software for audio production, animation, 3D printing and design, and video production. Right now it's open by reservation only, which you can make on our event calendar on the library's website, burbanklibrary.org. In addition, we have our Audacity online learning circle that Kitty mentioned coming right up starting May 1st. So if you were inspired by this talk and you want to get into the technical side with a small group of fellow learners, we'll be meeting over 4 Saturdays in May to learn Audacity together. It's a free software suitable for podcasting and simple music recording. So again, you can register for that on our event calendar at burbanklibrary.org. When you leave this evening, you'll be redirected to an evaluation form. We would really appreciate it if you would fill that out. Thank you again and have a great evening.